I'm Elad, and this is the Here We Come podcast. Recently, a revolution overtook the country of Nepal. It was democratic, it was leaderless, it happened largely online, and it was led by a group of largely Gen Z protesters. They worked together on places like Discord, TikTok, they coordinated, they connected and they worked together, and relatively quickly they overthrew the government of Nepal and are now working on creating a democratic future for the country. That protest and that movement then inspired another movement in Morocco. And those two movements then inspired another movement in Madagascar. And alongside all this are very similarly structured movements happening all around the world. In addition, recently, you might have noticed there was a big mayoral election in New York. This inspired and moved a lot of people. It got them talking, it got them thinking, and for the first time in a long time, liberals and progressives and others started to see that there is potentially a future for us in America. And that really matters. And all of that means that there is not just one singular thing occurring. Some of them are coordinating, yes. Some of them are inspired by each other, yes. But what's actually happening is that above the surface, we are facing a lot of problems. And underneath the surface, there is something brewing that is about to make a lot of change. And if we want to be, we can be part of it. That's what Here We Come means. That's what this is about. Is that if you believe in democracy and you believe in nonviolence, you believe in abolition, you believe in liberation, you are likely someone who aligns with these movements. And you are likely someone who's looking for something like these movements. That's a big reason that what happened in New York inspired so many people. It's not because it came out of nowhere. It's because we were looking for it. It's because we want to be part of it and we're trying to figure out how to build it. And that's all happening in the face of authoritarianism and fascism. Morocco, Nepal, all these places are facing authoritarianism and inequality, a lot of the same difficulties we're facing. And that's a reason that a lot of them are looking for solutions that are leaderless, that are non-hierarchical, that work together online, and all of these different aspects that make them, in essence and in reality, more democratic and more nonviolent. That's what we need to do. Ironically, the group that has been the most successful at doing that so far is the far right. The group that has most succeeded at being non-hierarchical and working together and coordinating like this. When you think of a movement that is working together online, coordinating, making change, in America, you largely think of the far right. You largely think of Nick Fuentes. You think about these people and they are succeeding. And so the truth is, what we're facing right now in America, what we're facing around the world, in Israel and Palestine and Nepal and Iran and all around the world, is this upcoming movement that has been growing not just for this generation, not just with Gen Z, not just with millennials. You know, Mamdani was inspired by Bernie Sanders, and Bernie Sanders was inspired by others, and democratic movements have been building for generations. That's what we're part of. That's what we're trying to build. And what's happening with the growth of fascism is not an inorganic thing that came out of nowhere. It's a angry reaction to our movement, to the world that is being built that we are part of and that we're going to help bring about. That's what they're doing. They're fighting back. They're afraid. They see change and they can't imagine a world that is truly different. And so they're going more and more fascistic, more and more right-wing. It's not a coincidence that the right is getting more far right. It's not just a thing that occurred because of the internet. It's because people in that world are afraid of the change that nonviolent democratic movements are bringing into the world. They've been afraid for decades, for generations. Now what we have to do is coordinate, come together, work and learn from not just Nepal, not just Morocco, but we also have to learn from the far right. We have to work together, coordinate with each other, know who the we is in the Here We Come, in the revolution, and in the transformation of America and the world. And once we know that, and once we learn the tactics, the strategies, and once we come together and combine our efforts, the change can happen. That's what this podcast is about. It's about us learning together, working together, bringing together movement leaders, bringing together other people thinking about this, who want to build a more democratic, nonviolent future. We're going to do that together. We're going to do it here. We're going to use this podcast to help create networks, to work together, to model what I'm talking about and what I hope we can help create in America and Israel and all around the world. So welcome to Here We Come. So I've been writing for a while about democracy, fascism, and how we're going to get to this kind of next stage of the world. And the truth is, I got connected to a lot of special people because of that, and I'm really grateful for it. And one of the themes that came out of those discussions was we need to keep finding new mediums and new approaches to reaching people. And so I got harassed by some people, especially the guest I'm about to introduce you to, and others, to start a podcast. And to be honest, I'm really excited about it. I think there's a lot we can do. And I think we have a lot of exciting potential guests I'm excited to bring on. Now, Farrah, who is not just a guest, she's actually my partner on this podcast. We're working together on the podcast, and it was really important for me to start with Farrah because Farrah and I have been doing work for a long time together. We connected through a Muslim-Jewish dialogue group called New Ground in LA. And since then, we kind of realized how much we share in terms of our views of democracy, of our desire to create liberation in the world. And since then, we've done a lot together, not just this, but I'm super excited to have you, super excited to do this.
I'm so happy to be here. Your very first guest of Here We Come. I love this name, Elad. Like, what made you think of this name?
So we're doing the thing already. You're a journalist, so you're interviewing.
No, I'm really genuinely curious about why you really decided. Because we actually had some names. We were brainstorming, and then we settled on one we thought was really good, and then we actually even kind of extended the way. But I love this name of this podcast. I just want you to know that you and I executive producing this. When I say Here We Come, I feel energetic about it. I feel like purposeful about it. But how did you come up with that?
Well, the truth was when we first started this, the idea of the name for the podcast was transformation, or the transformation. And the idea was similar in the sense that we really believe that there's a coming potential not just revolution, but a true transformation of the way people think and the way people build society. And that's something we want to be part of. But the truth was, I felt like that name was descriptive and kind of academic in the big picture. And my goal is, and the truth is, I think as someone who's been writing, I've been writing a lot about, as you know, fascism, democracy, anti-fascism, how we build a better world. And I've come to realize that it's not enough to describe things. Like, I've been warning people about fascism for 10 years.
Yeah.
And to be honest, it's a little sad for me, but I also really believe, I don't think I actually accomplished much. And it's not to put myself down. It's that I think a lot of us had this construct of, if we just tell people, if we just describe what's happening, something will happen. People will be activated. They'll care. They'll move. And I actually think it's the opposite. I think describing it either scared people, or, and this was the constant frustration for so many of us. They were like, "Oh, don't worry, things are going to be fine."
You're being really dramatic right now, right? Like, that's the that's the vibe. Like,
effect, yeah.
You don't have to exaggerate. Right. That's really not going to happen. Right. Yeah,
and it was exhausting, and it was so upsetting. And so I think it would be easy to go and be like, "These idiots brought us here. They didn't do anything. They didn't fight enough. They didn't listen to us." And I still feel that, but maybe we cut that part. But the truth
I think maybe we should leave that in.
But the truth is, I do really think that approach has hurt things in the big picture. I think the only way we're going to get out of this is something that is forward looking. And I think when we say anti-fascism and we describe that as the approach that we're taking, that creates a binary where we assume that what existed before was preferable and fascism is bad, and what we have to do is get back to that. That's not what we have to do. Like, that was the other thing I realized was, the more I dug into this, the more I went beyond studying fascism to studying social justice, to connecting with people like Patrisse Cullors and others from Black Lives Matter, and listening to such voices, connecting with people like you. It became clear to me, this is not about going backwards. This is about realizing that everything that got us here is part of the problem, is connected to fascism, and in many ways is literally authoritarianism. So I think what we're trying to do here is message that when I say here we come, the idea is not just that there is this movement, but that we are part of it together. If you're listening to this, or you're a part of it, if you care about it, we're not just going to talk about things. We're not just going to look and describe things or get scared of things or all of these things or talk about how bad things are. We're going to say, we're going towards somewhere. We're coming to you.
I'm going to be real with you here for a second. As you know, I've lived in authoritarianism and fascism as a former war correspondent. I don't know. I knew what was coming. You and I talked about this. We knew what was coming. And do you think we knew it would be this? What it looks like right now?
Well, to be honest, I do kind of feel like my nightmares or concerns about what's going to happen came to pass, in the sense, the thing was like, I think what we did, or at least I'll say speak for myself. Yeah. I don't think I did anything. It's not like we had magical abilities to see the future. It was that they told us everything they were going to do. Yeah. We just believed them.
Yep.
You know, like 100%.
And I didn't think that they would do it this fast.
Yeah, that was,
so
yes.
I knew that these things were coming because they do the same playbook. They do this thing everywhere. It's the same playbook. Generation after generation, revolution after revolution. It just really surprised me how quickly they were able to do it. It shouldn't have surprised me.
Yeah.
It shouldn't have, right? Well,
I know I was going to add "and effectively." I mean, it's easy to look at these places as bumbling and screwing up, especially the first administration was really like that. But I think when you have these true believers like Stephen Miller working with them, they're not only working quickly, they're working very effectively. And they know, like, one of the biggest mistakes people make is assuming the far right is stupid. The far right is very smart. I would argue they're much smarter than us. And not that we're stupid, but that we have not adapted to the new reality. They had a forward-looking vision, and they created it. And they did it in a creative and thoughtful way. And someone like Stephen Miller, I think for good reason, people are making fun of him and how he looks and all these different things, but he's very smart and he's very effective. When ICE was resistant to just pulling people off the streets, he went into their offices, yelled at the people in charge, and told them that it didn't matter, that they should go to schools, they should go to places of work, they shouldn't care about, whether someone was innocent or guilty of something. And essentially he argued for exactly what we're seeing. And that allowed this situation of things speeding up. And that's because he knew they had a practice round, and now they're really getting going. So I agree with you. It was much faster than expected and more effective than I expected.
They wrote about it. They wrote 900 pages about it in Project 2025. I will say to you, as a complete nerd, and I know you care about me anyway, because you are also a nerd, I did read all those pages. And
I'm not that much of a nerd.
I felt that I had a good understanding of what they were trying to do, because essentially they were going to delete every single layer of accountability, of structure, of what has taken this country. I mean, we're going to be spending, it'll be 250 years next year. It's taken 250 years for this experiment to get here. Yep. And they were able, in these first 6 months of this year, to, maybe even earlier, to really completely wipe that out. And I guess, what did it take Hitler at 53 days, something like that. Right. So I guess it shouldn't have surprised me.
Right.
But I was surprised that they worked so fast. Yeah. They knew what they had to do. They'd already planned it. One of the things I said this to you when you wrote this article about how the far right is extremely effective. And in one of the ways that they are extremely effective is that they are democratic. And I loved when you actually wrote that article, because I learned a lot about it. But I really think that they use the levers of power to their benefit.
Right.
That people across the board, the centrists and the lefts, just don't know how to do. Why do you think they do that? Like, why do you think that they are so effective at it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main reason, like the groups that I'm describing in that article are the fringe groups that helped make 2016 and now 2024 happen, which is groups that were originally sidelined. Largely, we know that the whole Trump phenomenon was about, barreling over the establishment and the Republican establishment. And these are groups that were aligned with that. I would argue they're the reason that he won in 2016. They're definitely the reason he won in 2024. And the reason I think they're more effective is not because they're literally smarter, but because they were forced to adapt more than we were, or they were incentivized, I should say, to adapt more. There's other cultural reasons, I think, but that's a big one, is that they were crushed, in many ways. Being a Nazi used to be a bad thing, right? And
well, it used to be a
bad thing. And now, you can have, if we said like 10 years ago, Tucker Carlson was going to have a neo-Nazi join his show, I don't think most people would have believed it, if only because it would destroy his career, and the point is that they had to build an entire distributed network to succeed. And they did it largely online. And that's part of why I describe it as quote unquote democratic. It's not that they care about democracy. It's that they need to work in a distributed, non-hierarchical way to make change. So when you look at 2024 and what happened, it wasn't that there was, this idea that Joe Rogan made a difference. Is people have learned the exact opposite lesson that they were supposed to learn. Joe Rogan, in the big scheme of things, is the biggest influencer among many, many influencers, and influencers in different niches, influencers in different places, trad wives and, workout bros and, what is it? All of these things. And they came together. They worked in coalition with each other. And there was no one leader of it. It wasn't Trump even, that's the reason that I really believe that when Trump falls, whenever that is, it's not that the whole movement falls. People have a singular understanding of how movements work now in America, and they are still operating like it's the 90s or like it's the 30s. Bringing down Hitler ended a lot. That's not what's going to happen here. What's going to happen is likely something more vicious is going to happen.
What do you think that is, the more vicious thing?
I mean, they're openly declaring it, right? I talked about Tucker Carlson. Nick Fuentes was just on his show. Are we really surprised? In the sense of, Nick Fuentes is a perfect example of someone who understands the democratic nature of the internet. When he goes on places like Twitter, he's not only saying fuck Jews. He's not only, explicitly identifying himself with Hitler, which he has done plenty of times. He talks about Zionists. He describes himself as trying to build a coalition of leftists and people from the right. I just was interacting with someone who's in my circle of progressive Jews. And he argued that Nick Fuentes is not as bad as other people on the right, because he believes, as much as he believes in horrible things, he also believes that the way to get to where they need to go is through equal rights. This is a leftist. And he understands this because Nick Fuentes is entering his social media feed because he's talking about Israel, right? And this is not to say that, this is not about criticism of Israel. It's not about anti-Semitism when it comes to activists. I'm saying Nick Fuentes understands that you have different messages to different audiences, that you don't just go for one singular success. You go here, you go there. He's not just been on Tucker Carlson's podcast. Tucker Carlson's podcast was the culmination of being on many podcasts and being on Twitter. I feel like you and me can always go dark with this stuff. We can do that all day.
You know that because we have.
Yeah, we're just and it's funny because we're just having fun when we talk. Like, this is fun, but
which for I will just say, a lot of people don't think that's a lot of fun. But, I mean, you and I think it's a lot of fun.
Right.
But going dark. But
that's the thing. I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's the thing that I know is, like, up till this point, I think if people have stuck with us up to this point, it's very hard. I think for a lot of, like, you can feel like in our conversation, I'm trying to imagine a listener now who's not used to hearing all this stuff, or tries to avoid reading it in the news for their own health, right?
Yeah.
It is very overwhelming to hear stuff like this. When I say that when Trump falls, something worse is going to take its place, that sounds, number one, sounds fatalist. And in many ways it is. But the thing is,
And this is why I really want this podcast to be not that, because it's not just a random hope. It's that I genuinely don't believe that any of the stuff we're saying is inevitable. That was actually the problem with how I talked before, how I think a lot of us talked. Was it's very easy now to like take some sort of credit for being right. As a Cassandra, what I'm upset about is that I didn't help stop make it wrong, or I didn't help enough making it stop happen. Like I should have proven myself wrong, and others of us should have proven ourselves wrong. And I don't mean, I'm not trying to throw you into that. I'm saying just a lot of us who worked in that way.
How would you have done that, do you think?
Well, this is how I think we're going to do it, because I think what I'm doing right now is what was important was I do think it's very important. We do talk about the far right, and we do talk about how bad things can get, but not purely to go into the darkness and not purely to talk about how scary it is. Rather, what the far right did was make change. They made change in effective ways. Surprise, surprise, we're in a movement that's trying to make change, right? We believe in that. And we're not just, unlike a lot of Ezra Kleins in the world, sorry to drop that name, I had to, but unlike a lot of...
I'm on board with you on this.
Unlike the consultants and all these people, we're not trying to win one election, right? Unlike them, we're not hoping for one success. We are, in a sense, trying to make as much of a transformative change as these far-right people are. Not because we're quote-unquote far left, but because we believe in true democracy, a democracy that doesn't base itself in, an origin of slavery and colonialism and all these things. We're not just trying to win an election, and we're not just trying to win one thing. We're trying to make transformative change. And thus, everything we talk about with the far right and many other things can be a lesson. It can be an opportunity for us to gain and grow in the way that they have. And strategically and thoughtfully. And that's part of why in the intro, I mentioned Nepal and I mentioned these other places, because they used similar tactics. They were distributed. They knew that they would be crushed, similar to the way the far right used to be crushed, because they live in authoritarian governments. And they worked through places like Discord and other ways. And when they did get shut down, it wasn't like that was it. They learned how to use VPNs and they taught each other. The reason Morocco succeeded, or is succeeding and is doing relatively well, is because they're learning from each other and they're growing together. And that idea of learning from each other is where we need to go. And I believe, like, when you're saying what can we do differently, I think this is one example of what we can do differently.
I have been, as you know, very inspired by these literal grassroots movements of these young people in all of these countries, essentially saying, we are not going to play by those rules. We're not going to we need a revolution. I feel really inspired about that. I think some of us have maybe caught on here in this country to some of that revolutionary spirit. I think a lot of us feel that way about Mamdani in New York. Not only does he understand who he is, he understands what his message is, and you can't move him from that. And I think his ability to be completely morally clear on where he stands, no matter what comes at him, and he wasn't willing to sacrifice his values to get there. And I see that reflected in all of these young people around the world who feel that they weren't going to allow an authoritarian and a fascist to just take over their country, that they had agency and that they were going to fight.
Yeah, if you only measure things by elections, you are missing. It's like looking at a painting and looking at the lines. You're missing everything. We are all, by definition, as humans, we are part of something bigger, just living our lives. We don't notice it very often, but in so many ways, so much of it gets shaped by what we consume and how we look at things. But I really hope that in this podcast and other places, we can talk about how, this is not just spiritual. It's just the idea of, like, there are these corrupt authoritarians all over the world. And some places are more democratic, some are less. But the inequality, the corruption, the selfishness, the top-down hierarchy of even the people that call themselves democratic is widespread. And it's not a coincidence. It's that this is the world that was created by, a network of people in the world. It benefited them. They were incentivized to do it, and they did it. And so the reaction to that is just at its base human. We all want liberation. We all want to feel free. We all want to feel equal. And honestly, I think one of the biggest problems with the way capitalism has infected people's brains, especially older generations, is the idea that it somehow is tapping into something normal about humans. I actually think what it does is it elevates the people for whom greed,
corruption,
and greed and corruption and no scruples, like all these things that are kind of like the essence of the way capitalism works, and like when you distill it from all the regulation that could potentially hold it back, it uplifts people like that,
and it sanitizes, and it's those things,
right? And it's not us humans. Like the more I've evolved and tried to learn about fascism, ironically, it keeps bringing me back to wanting to learn more about humans, because we react to fascism and we give into fascism because of sociological mechanisms. We're all human, and we all get drawn into things for different reasons. And they have to do a lot more with a base, in my opinion, they have a lot more to do with the base humanity of us all and the way our brains work than it has to do with, it does have to do with things like politics, but there's other things happening. And so what I mean by that is, for 95% of humanity, literally, we worked cooperatively with the people around us. We connected with each other. Everyone had different roles. I'm describing it semi-utopianly, but like what I'm really saying is that people are made to be cooperative. We evolved to be cooperative. That is what makes us successful as people, whether we were in tribes or whether we're building societies. The problem is we've created like a malignancy and an idea that's disconnected from that tribal core of being human, that is constantly being pushed against. We are constantly aware on some base level that we are humans that cooperate with the people around us. We are not inherently unequal. People have different roles, but we're not unequal. Like this is not some fantasy. This is what it means to be human. And what's happening is that society has been built to make us inhuman. My daughter recently said, she's like in 4th grade, and she recently said, I hate it when people tell me what to do because it makes me feel like I'm a robot, like I'm not human.
Wow.
She's, I thought it was so beautifully told. It was, she's a rebel like her father, but, I thought it was.
Actually, all 3 of your girls, I will just say, are rebels like their father.
Yeah. And so anyway, so just to say that I think we are used to thinking that society is built to make us robots. And I think that humanity as a whole will always push against that. And I think what we're doing together is helping that wave, take over.
You and I were really frustrated for a long time that people were not catching on.
Yeah.
They couldn't see it. And I would argue that several things have changed in that perspective. And I know that you might not completely be on, but walk with me for just a sec. So I think Israel-Palestine exposed the level of what we're willing to tolerate. I saw Palestine 36 recently, and if you haven't seen it, I need you to go see it. You cannot understand 1948. You cannot understand right now if you cannot see 1936, because everything that happened in Palestine in 1936, when it was mandatory Palestine, informs every moment after that, every big revolutionary moment after that. So Israel-Palestine exposed so much. I think the Epstein files exposed so much. You had this elite group of people who basically, they were horrible, horrible human beings. And they protected each other because they could, because they had a lot of money and they had a lot of power, and they could whitewash each other's horrific crimes. And really for a long time, the right was really mobilized that it was these Democrats, this cabal of people who were really covering up for each other. It's not just Democrats. It's all of them. It's Republicans and Democrats and people who are not any political party. But now we see in this bigger way what's been exposed to us. It's this elites who we have the biggest wealth gap ever between the 1% and the rest of us. It's part of this sort of big class of people who have always protected each other, continue to protect each other. And I think that the Epstein files has really created a fracture in this extremist far-right movement. And I remember saying this to you a few months ago. We had this whole conversation about how I think that this is the fracture that really is going to break apart the coalitions of fascism. Mm. You didn't agree with me, you thought.
Yeah, I mean, I had just been, we've all been through so much, so many moments where we thought, okay, this is it, or people thought this is it. Things like Mueller, the Mueller investigation, and January 6th. And,
you would have thought if there was anything,
right,
yeah.
Exactly. And it felt to me premature to say, okay, this Epstein thing is going to do it, because this was one of many scandals. It's a horrific scandal.
Actually, you just didn't want me to be right. Like, you can admit it now.
That is for sure true. And the good news is I have to admit that you are right in many ways.
But your check is in the mail, Elad.
But I also think, so yes, I think I was wrong. But I think I would, me, I always will take it dark. Partly because it's just a good bet, but also because there's just a lot of evidence as to what's happening right now. We see it fracturing. And a lot of people assume that the moment a extremist movement fractures, that the people will leave the extremists, in the sense of Marjorie Taylor Greene, Raskin saying she's welcome into our tent and all this nonsense. I think the reason he and others say stuff like that is because they live in a fantasy world. They hope and believe that people leaving extremism go towards democracy. I don't think that's true. I think it's true for some. I also think that when an extremist is proven wrong about certain things, like that their leader is some great leader, they often go the other way. I've lived through that. I lived in a Hasidic world where people began questioning the problems they saw in their communities. I was one of the activists at the time, and I saw very clearly with the people around me, the people who could start to see the problems went one or two ways. They either went, as I mentioned, towards a more democratic way of thinking. A lot of them ended up leaving the community in the way I did. Others doubled down on their beliefs. They went further. And I think what we're seeing with Marjorie Taylor Greene is a larger movement that's moving forward right now. And the movement that I'm describing is the Nick Fuentes, Tucker Carlson. Essentially, you could describe it as the anti-Zionist or anti-Israel faction of the right. And the reason that matters is because you just described, and it was funny because my instinct when you said the word cabal, I got a little activated. And I think the reason for that was because everything you described is in many ways accurate. I mean, it is accurate. And there is a narrative built to distract people and get them to uphold that structure, the very structure that upsets them, because a mythos has been built to suck them further into their extremism, into further fighting each other, instead of uplifting everyone. So Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's upset, and she's realizing that Donald Trump and others may be part of this cabal. But Marjorie Taylor Greene has a certain set of beliefs that help explain this.
And they don't change. They haven't changed, actually. Right. What we know is that the Marjorie Taylor Greenes of the world, and I totally agree with you on this, we are really aligned on this, the Nick Fuentes of the J.D. Vance of the world, they are the even more extreme, and that is where they're headed.
But to be even more specific, what I'm naming in terms of mythos is anti-Semitism. And I think that really matters because
that's absolutely true.
Right. And there's a reason that the genocide and the war in Gaza helped create this situation because it put a wedge in everywhere, right? I mean, this is the wedge issue. For a long time, we're used to Israel being the wedge issue for Democrats and for progressives, liberals and progressives. But the truth is that the right has had something brewing for a long time. When you are bigoted against black people and trans people and brown people and immigrants, usually you buy into a conspiracy theory that also names elitists and names, cabals and all these things. And at their core,
I mean, you need an enemy.
right. And at their core, they're anti-Semitic, right? So what's happening right now is that the right is facing a reckoning. Is it going to go further to the right, which by definition means going towards anti-Semitism, or are they going to go in a democratic direction? So it's very clear what's happening. There's one group that is buying into that is trying to stick with Trump. Ironically, they are the group that believes in democracy more, and they're the less bigoted group. The actual group that is now gaining steam, the movement that's both grassroots and being funded by people like Musk and others, is a coalition of neo-Nazis and others, as I mentioned before. I just realized we're going in the dark direction again.
Nick Fuentes is mainstream.
Yeah.
I mean, it should scare the living daylights out of all of us that a Nazi is mainstream right now. And that is what you're talking about. And they are extremely anti-Semitic. And that also should scare the living daylights out of all of us, because if you're talking about people who are willing to openly be anti-Semitic, and they are not getting pushback, they are not getting that kind of pushback, which means they're also going to be Islamophobic. They're also going to be extremely racist. Those things work together.
Yeah.
You can't just be anti-Semitic and not be all of those other things.
Right.
It is a slippery slope, and they are going there, and they have the backing, they have the people, they have the mainstream now that they can easily say these things and not suffer for it.
What you are describing to me is very important because, for example, when the Buffalo shooting that targeted black people at a grocery store occurred, it was by a shooter believed in the same conspiracy theory as Donald Trump, the Great Replacement conspiracy theory. And that is a conspiracy theory connected to all the groups you're discussing, right? Including Jews. So I wrote an article at the time saying, this is also an anti-Semitic incident. Just like the Pittsburgh shooting at the synagogue was also an anti-black racist shooting, and Islamophobic and all these things. I want to keep, when we talk about the far right, I'm going to keep in my head trying to bring us back to something, which is that this points to the solution. When you look at the people who are largely part of the establishment, who are part of, the well-funded groups who fight anti-Semitism and all these things that are known for, standing up for Jewish rights in America and that kind of thing. A lot of them base their strategy on singular success, attaching to power, trying to help keep Jews safe. And that has actually worked for a long time because America was more democratic and it was more effective to do that. Now, I wouldn't say that was sustainable, and I think we're being proven that it's not sustainable, because when you're only fighting for one group, you are not creating the world that actually makes you safe. Right?
Exactly.
So what you can do, you could fight only for yourself. And what that means, I would argue that they and many others contributed to a situation that led us directly to a rise in anti-Semitism, which is that, imagine if we as a society, not just Jewish, I don't want to put this on Jews, this as a society, if we, every time a shooting happened against one group, we stood with that group, we called together everyone to stand with that group, and we pointed out that we are also targets, not in a way of diluting the danger, which I think a lot of people are afraid of doing, but in describing that we are in this together. If that happened, I think we would be in a very different place. And that can still happen. That's the only way we're going to get out of this.
And there was a time when it did happen, actually. Right. Muslims would show up for Jews. Jews would show up for Muslims. Yeah. Christians would show up for Jews and Muslims. I remember a time. I remember people showing up for each other.
Well, first, I would be careful to not speak in blanket terms because I think we saw more. But these were small groups, relatively speaking. I was in New York at this time, and Jews and Muslims did show up for each other, but it was we're talking New York, right? Like these were small
Yeah.
groups of people, relatively speaking. There were also, of course, people that were going to airports, and so I don't mean to downplay things. Like you're absolutely right. There were these huge groups of people that went to airports during the Muslim ban and that made these massive protests. And the Women's March, existed. And in theory, there was like some solidarity happening there that fell apart, right? But you're absolutely right. Like things have gotten worse, right? Things in many ways have gotten worse because, we see it. The right is very strategic. It picks people off. They're very effective at creating division and at making people feel like they're part of the right. So a musician that I follow that I love, I saw her live at a show recently, and I had no idea who she was. And then I saw a video of her recently that went viral. She yelled in the middle of a gym about how there was a man with a dick in the ladies' locker room.
Wow.
And what she was talking about was a trans person. I don't know the details of what she saw, what she didn't see, but since then, she has been a right-wing star and a purposeful one.
But she wasn't that way before.
I don't
At least
know.
as far as you could tell.
Not ideologically, maybe, but definitely not openly. She was inspiring. I thought she was very inspiring and sounded, as far as I could tell, seemed, progressive and all these. And she herself is LGBTQ and a person of color. And I would assume, I guess, we tend to assume, and maybe we shouldn't, but the thing is that after that happened, she got sucked into this vortex that has been built. It's not accidental, it's constructed. So first she worked with a group called Gays Against Groomers. Gays Against Groomers is a hate group. It's, in theory, I don't know if it actually is run by gay people, but the idea is that they call themselves LGB and not LGBT, which is to cut trans people out of the movement. And Gays Against Groomer is just as vicious, maybe more vicious than anyone on the far right who goes after trans people. And they legitimize their cause they help create division because they claim to be both gay, liberal, and, part of a larger movement. But the movement they're actually part of is connected to libs of TikTok, Elon Musk. Like those are the people they work with. So that when she joined up with them, that's where she went. And then she ended up on Fox News and she ended up on podcasts and all these things.
Wow.
All of that was purposeful. It wasn't an accident. Now, I want to point to, again, another corollary that is the opposite example. I was talking before about establishment and how that has failed us. The establishment failed because, unlike the right, there is no such machine to build, at least not as effective, that will take someone from a social media star who spoke out about a cause, let's sanitize it, take out the evil part of it, and say there's no such person who goes viral, helps legitimize a cause, and then gets connected to a huge influencer that helps make them large, and then goes on a TV station and then gets connected to, we don't have that as a complete built system, right? Definitely not when we're talking about the revolutionary left. We're talking about, maybe for Democrats to an extent, but really
not
very
even
much
then.
not really. Yeah. On the other hand, there is, I would argue, a large group that is working on making that happen. Not just that, but what I mean is like the machine, the cause, the structure of taking people from the bottom up and getting their voices lifted up in a way that, again, is more democratic, and helping make change in the way that is progressive. And the people I'm talking about are people like Mamdani, right? So what happened was when establishments who were supposed to fight against bigotry, let's say like anti-Semitism, stopped working with other people, they left a void that has been filled by the right. The right claims to be in coalition with Jews. And so they have been able to create a system, that uplifts people that talk about anti-Semitism, but in a way that hurts progressive movements. I used to myself get sucked into that. When I started criticizing the Women's March, whether, no matter how right or wrong or whatever, I got on the news instantly. I got on CNN. I was meeting with Jonathan Greenblatt from the ADL. I was,
people were throwing money at you.
I mean, at the attention at the very least. Not that I wish more money, but but it helped make this cause. Like, I helped become one of the people that helped spread the concept that anti-Semitism is a malignancy on the left. And at that time, especially as time passed, as I became more vocal about right-wing anti-Semitism, I tried to be, equal and this and that. And it became very clear no one was going to put me on the news for talking about right-wing anti-Semitism. And in fact, when I started talking about how the right-wing anti-Semitism is worse and more dangerous and more insidious and has potential for a lot more murders and all these things, it was gone. Like, it wasn't just small. We're talking literally the entire machine disappeared because there was no machine. You know what I'm saying? So there is a corollary that is starting to change that. I have now a bunch of friends who I worked with when I lived in Brooklyn. I got connected to like the grassroots Jewish left, who come from all different backgrounds, who are more liberal, less progressive, just very different groups. But the thing that holds them together is their grassroots. They work together, they connect with each other, and they work in coalition. They work with Muslim groups, they work with pro-Palestine groups, but they also work with Black liberation groups. They work to create affordability, right? Like, the group that I most aligned with at the time was called JFRED, Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, which says the entire thing. And so when Mamdani became mayor, it wasn't an inorganic show that he brought Jews along. But like, again, so I know something like 10 people who got brought into his transition team who are Jews and represent Jews. Now, there's a lot of people who would downplay them as Jews, but this shows this group of Jews is now the people most tasked with fighting anti-Semitism in New York.
That's the coalition that Mamdani built.
Yeah. Sorry, I'll just say one more thing. And that's the corollary. That's the way we fight the coalition that's building among neo-Nazis. What Mamdani represents is the best solution to fighting anti-Semitism because he has a coalition.
I would argue we're trying to do that here. Here we come.
Oh, a Jew and a Muslim.
I find that's really inspiring to me right now because I feel like there's a shift that's happening. And I think we feel that. Like, that's why we're doing this podcast, because we feel there's a shift. And this is the moment. This is the moment to walk in, to step in. Because if we lose this moment, we know what's ahead of us. It only gets harder and darker and more cruel.
Yeah. And I really believe that there is this huge opportunity. It's not imaginary. It's not impossible. It's actually, this is the moment that we have the most potential for success since Trump was elected. Where it's not just happening in America, it's happening in Nepal, it's happening in all these places. Because as I mentioned, this is a larger movement that we're part of, whether we know it or not. And we all have the opportunity to work in these coalitions. There are so many people that are doing work on the ground that we can connect with. When people ask me, what can we do? There are so many things you can do. If you know to trust grassroots movements and to work with them, you can get involved in a lot. And I really believe that there is so much potential for success. And here we come.
Here we come.
I had to do that. I feel stupid, but I did it.
You should not feel stupid.